The man sitting across from Oprah Winfrey held himself with the careful stillness of someone who had deliberately stripped away every piece of technology that had once defined his existence. At 38, Kevin Park still carried the sharp intelligence that had made him one of Silicon Valley's most celebrated minds. But there was something fundamentally different about him now, an analog quality that seemed almost anachronistic in the digital age he had helped create. His simple white cotton shirt and worn jeans stood in stark contrast to the designer hoodies and expensive sneakers that had been his uniform during his years as a tech titan, and his hands, unadorned by smart watches or rings, moved with the deliberate precision of someone who had learned to navigate the world without the digital crutches that most people couldn't imagine living without. He carried no phone, wore no fitness tracker, and had arrived at the studio in a taxi he had hailed on the street, rather than summoning through an app. The only technology visible on his person was a simple mechanical wristwatch, a deliberate choice that spoke of someone who had rejected the very innovations he had once pioneered. His dark hair was longer than the regulation Silicon Valley cut he had maintained during his tech executive years, and his eyes, behind wire-rimmed glasses, held both the intensity of a brilliant mind and the haunted recognition of someone who had seen too far into the future and chosen to step back from the precipice. The familiar warmth of Harpo Studios buzzed around them, but Kevin felt hyper-aware of every camera, every microphone, every digital device that made modern television production possible. 3 years ago, he would have been fascinated by the technology behind the show, would have engaged producers in conversations about streaming capabilities and audience analytics. Now, he found himself uncomfortable with the constant surveillance, the data collection, the algorithmic systems that were undoubtedly analyzing every aspect of his appearance and the audience's response to his presence. Oprah Winfrey sat in her signature chair, radiant in a deep royal blue silk blouse that commanded both attention and respect. Her presence filled the studio with that unique combination of authority and wisdom that had made her the most trusted voice in American media for over 2 decades. Today's show was dedicated to Technology for Good, a special episode highlighting innovators who had used technology to solve problems, connect communities, and improve lives in meaningful ways. But Dr. Kevin Park carried a secret that would transform this celebration of technological progress into something far more complex and disturbing. He had gotten on the show by telling the producers he wanted to discuss his work on artificial intelligence applications that could help underserved communities access education and healthcare. It wasn't entirely untrue. He had worked on such projects during his final months at Technova, the company he had co-founded and led for 8 years. But the truth was that Kevin had not come to celebrate technology's potential for good. He had come to confess that he had created something monstrous, something that was systematically destroying human connection and mental health on a global scale, and that his journey away from technology had been a desperate attempt to reclaim his own humanity. Kevin had been a child prodigy, writing his first computer program at age 7 and developing his first mobile app while still in high school. He had graduated from MIT at 19 with degrees in computer science and cognitive psychology, fascinated by the intersection of human behavior and digital systems. By 25, he had co-founded Technova with his college roommate, initially focused on developing productivity software for small businesses. But the company's breakthrough had come when Kevin developed an algorithm that could predict user behavior with unprecedented accuracy. By analyzing patterns in how people interacted with digital interfaces, the system could anticipate what users wanted before they knew they wanted it, creating a level of personalization and engagement that made other platforms seem primitive by comparison. The algorithm caught the attention of major social media companies, and Kevin found himself in the position of licensing his technology to platforms with billions of users worldwide. His behavioral prediction system became the foundation for recommendation engines, that determined what content people saw, what products they were shown, and even who they might want to connect with. Within 5 years, Kevin's algorithms were influencing the daily experiences of nearly half the world's internet users. The success was intoxicating. Kevin found himself celebrated as a visionary, invited to speak at conferences about the future of human-computer interaction, profiled in magazines as one of the most influential technologists of his generation. Technova's valuation soared past $10 billion, making Kevin one of the youngest billionaires in tech history. He lived in a smart home that anticipated his every need, drove cars that drove themselves, and worked in offices where artificial intelligence handled everything from scheduling meetings to ordering lunch. But sometime around his 35th birthday, Kevin began to notice disturbing patterns in his own behavior and the behavior of people around him. Despite being more connected than ever before, he felt increasingly isolated. Despite having access to more information than any human in history, he felt less informed about what really mattered. Despite having technology that could satisfy his desires instantly, he felt less satisfied with his life. More troubling were the reports that began filtering in from researchers studying the effects of the platforms powered by his algorithms. Teenage depression rates had skyrocketed in correlation with social media usage. Attention spans were declining. Political polarization was increasing as people became trapped in information bubbles that reinforced their existing beliefs. Sleep patterns were disrupted by devices designed to capture and hold attention indefinitely. The breaking point came when Kevin received a letter from Dr. Sarah Chen, an adolescent psychologist who had been treating increasing numbers of teenagers for anxiety, depression, and social isolation that seemed directly connected to their social media usage. Dr. Chen's letter was devastating in its specificity. She described young people who had lost the ability to concentrate on tasks for more than a few minutes, who measured their self-worth in likes and shares, who had become so dependent on digital validation that they couldn't function when separated from their devices. Your algorithm, Dr. Chen had written, has created a generation of young people who are addicted to external validation, who cannot tolerate boredom or solitude, who have lost the ability to form deep, meaningful relationships because they are constantly distracted by the next notification, the next piece of content, the next digital hit of dopamine. The letter forced Kevin to confront a truth he had been avoiding. The behavioral prediction system he had created wasn't just anticipating user preferences. It was shaping them, manipulating them, creating dependencies that served the interests of tech companies rather than the well-being of users. His algorithm was designed to maximize engagement, which meant keeping people on platforms as long as possible, regardless of whether that time was well spent or beneficial to their mental health. Kevin began conducting his own research into the effects of his technology, diving deep into studies about digital addiction, the neurological impacts of constant connectivity, and the social consequences of algorithmic content curation. What he discovered horrified him. His innovations were literally rewiring human brains, creating neural pathways that prioritized instant gratification over delayed satisfaction, external validation over internal confidence, passive consumption over active creation. The realization that he had become a digital drug dealer, that his algorithms were pusher systems designed to create and maintain addiction, sent Kevin into a crisis that nearly destroyed him. He began drinking heavily, sleeping poorly, and ironically, becoming increasingly dependent on the very technologies he was beginning to recognize as harmful. He would check his phone hundreds of times per day, scroll through social media feeds for hours at a time, and feel genuinely anxious when separated from his devices for even short periods. The moment of revelation came during a board meeting at Technova, when his business partners were discussing plans to make their algorithm even more effective at capturing user attention. As Kevin listened to detailed plans for exploiting psychological vulnerabilities and creating stronger behavioral dependencies, he realized he had become Dr. Frankenstein, and his creation was destroying the village. That night, Kevin made a decision that shocked his colleagues, investors, and the entire tech industry. He announced his resignation from Technova, sold his shares in the company, and began what he privately called his digital detox, a complete withdrawal from the connected world he had helped create. The process was more difficult than Kevin had anticipated. Giving up his smartphone felt like losing a limb. Disconnecting from social media created a genuine sense of isolation and FOMO that persisted for months. Learning to navigate the world without GPS, ride-sharing apps, and digital payment systems required developing skills he had forgotten he once possessed. But slowly, Kevin began to rediscover aspects of human experience that he had lost without realizing it. He could concentrate on single tasks for hours at a time. He could enjoy meals without photographing them, sunsets without sharing them, conversations without the urge to check his phone. He began sleeping better, feeling more present in his interactions with other people, and experiencing a kind of mental clarity he hadn't felt since childhood. Kevin moved to a small cabin in rural Montana, where reliable internet access was optional rather than assumed. He learned to chop wood, grow vegetables, and repair things with his hands rather than ordering replacements online. He read physical books by candlelight, wrote in paper journals with actual pens, and discovered that boredom, something he had spent years trying to eliminate for users, was actually a valuable mental state that led to creativity, self-reflection, and genuine contentment. Most importantly, Kevin began to understand the difference between being connected and being connective, between having access to information and having wisdom, between digital engagement and human fulfillment. The hyper-connected world he had helped create was making people increasingly isolated from themselves and each other, creating the illusion of connection while preventing the kind of deep, sustained relationships that actually nourished human well-being. That's what had brought him to Oprah's show today. After 3 years of analog living, Kevin felt compelled to share what he had learned about the unintended consequences of the technology he had created. The show's opening segments had featured inspiring technologists, a programmer who had developed apps to help people with disabilities navigate the world more easily, an engineer who had created communication systems for remote communities, and a data scientist who had used artificial intelligence to improve medical diagnoses. Ladies and gentlemen, Oprah announced, "I want you to meet Dr. Kevin Park." Kevin is one of the most influential technologists of the past decade, co-founder of Technova and creator of behavioral prediction algorithms that power many of the platforms we use every day. Today, he's here to share his insights about using artificial intelligence and data science to create positive change in the world. Kevin stood carefully, his movement deliberate and unhurried in a way that seemed almost foreign in the context of Silicon Valley's typical hyperkinetic energy. As he walked to the interview area, he felt the weight of 300 pairs of eyes on him and was struck by how different it felt to be observed by humans rather than monitored by algorithms. As they settled into their chairs, Oprah noticed that Kevin carried no phone, no tablet, no visible technology beyond his simple mechanical watch. His presence had an analog quality that seemed unusual for someone who had spent his career at the cutting edge of digital innovation. "Kevin," Oprah began warmly, "you've been at the forefront of developing artificial intelligence and behavioral prediction systems that have transformed how billions of people interact with technology. Tell us about the positive impact you believe these innovations can have on society." Kevin had prepared to discuss the beneficial applications of AI, the potential for technology to solve complex social problems, the ways that data science could improve education and healthcare. But sitting across from Oprah Winfrey, looking at an audience of people who were undoubtedly checking their phones and interacting with the very systems he had created, the prepared talking points felt not just inadequate, but dishonest. Oprah, he began, his voice carrying a weight that seemed inconsistent with celebrating technological progress. I came here today planning to talk about the positive potential of artificial intelligence and behavioral algorithms. But I can't do that in good conscience without first acknowledging the damage that my innovations have already caused. The audience shifted slightly, clearly not expecting this response from someone who should have been celebrating his technological achievements. What kind of damage? Oprah asked gently, sensing that they were moving into more complex territory than the typical tech success story. Kevin looked directly at the camera, then back at Oprah, and everyone watching could see him making a choice between promotion and confession. I created the behavioral prediction algorithms that power most major social media platforms. Kevin said, his voice growing steadier as he committed to honesty. I designed systems that analyze how people interact with digital content and then manipulate their future behavior to maximize engagement and attention capture. He paused, the weight of his confession settling over the studio. I thought I was making technology more personalized and useful. What I actually created was a sophisticated addiction machine that exploits psychological vulnerabilities to keep people engaged with platforms, regardless of whether that engagement is beneficial to their well-being. The studio fell into the kind of focused silence that comes when people realize they're witnessing something they hadn't expected. Not celebration, but confession. Kevin, Oprah said softly, are you saying that the technology you created is harmful? Kevin's voice was clear and unwavering as he answered, I'm saying that I created digital systems that function like drug dealers, he said. My algorithms identify what kind of content triggers the strongest emotional responses in individual users, then feed them increasingly extreme versions of that content to maintain their attention. The goal isn't to inform or educate or connect people. It's to create behavioral dependencies that serve the commercial interests of tech companies. He gestured toward the audience, most of whom were indeed holding phones. Look around the studio. How many people are checking their devices right now, even though they're attending a live television taping? That's not accident or personal weakness. That's the result of behavioral conditioning created by systems I designed to be irresistible. The audience members who had been glancing at their phones looked up guiltily, suddenly aware of their own behavior in a way they hadn't been moments before. But Kevin, Oprah pressed, surely technology has also created benefits. Global communication, access to information, opportunities for connection and learning. Of course, Kevin acknowledged, technology has enormous potential for good, but the specific algorithms I created prioritize engagement over truth, addiction over agency, behavioral predictability over personal growth. They're designed to give people more of what they already believe, more of what triggers their strongest emotional responses, more of what keeps them scrolling, rather than thinking. His voice grew more passionate as he continued. I created systems that trap people in information bubbles, that reinforce their existing beliefs and biases. I designed platforms that manipulate emotional responses to increase time on platform. I built behavioral prediction models that treat human beings like lab rats in a Skinner box, offering variable rewards to maintain compulsive behavior. The silence in the studio was profound, as audience members confronted the possibility that their relationship with technology was not as autonomous as they had believed. When did you realize what you had created? Oprah asked. Kevin's expression grew pained as he recalled the moment of recognition. 3 years ago, I received a letter from an adolescent psychologist who was treating teenagers for anxiety and depression that seemed directly connected to social media usage. She described young people who had lost the ability to concentrate, who measured their self-worth in likes and shares, who couldn't tolerate solitude because they had become dependent on constant digital stimulation. He paused, his voice becoming quieter. She told me that my algorithm was creating a generation of people who were psychologically dependent on external validation, who had lost the ability to think deeply or feel content without constant digital input. That's when I realized I hadn't created tools to enhance human connection. I had created systems that were systematically destroying people's capacity for genuine connection, contemplation, and contentment. Oprah leaned forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who understood the relationship between technology and human well-being. What did you do with that realization? Kevin's answer surprised everyone in the studio. I quit, he said simply. I resigned from my company, sold my shares, and began what I call my digital rebellion, a complete withdrawal from the connected world I had helped create. The audience murmured with surprise, unable to comprehend someone voluntarily disconnecting from the digital ecosystem that most people considered essential to modern life. I gave up my smartphone, my social media accounts, my smart home, my connected car, everything that linked me to the surveillance and manipulation systems I had created. I moved to a cabin in rural Montana, where I live without reliable internet access, where I read physical books by candlelight and write in paper journals with actual pens. He held up his hands, which showed calluses from manual labor, rather than the soft skin of someone who spent their days typing on keyboards. I learned to chop wood, grow food, and repair things with my hands. I discovered that boredom, something I had spent years trying to eliminate for users, is actually a valuable mental state that leads to creativity and self-reflection. Oprah was visibly moved by the transformation Kevin was describing. And how has this analog life affected you personally? Kevin's entire demeanor changed as he discussed his life after technology, his voice taking on a peace and clarity that seemed almost foreign. Coming from a former tech executive, I can concentrate on single tasks for hours at a time without feeling the compulsion to check for updates or notifications, he said. I can have conversations without the urge to photograph or share them. I can experience beautiful moments without the need to document them for digital validation. He paused, his voice growing stronger. Most importantly, I've rediscovered the difference between being connected and being connective. Digital connectivity gave me access to billions of people, but prevented me from developing deep relationships with anyone. Analog living has given me genuine connection with myself, with nature, with the few people I interact with regularly. But Kevin, Oprah asked, don't you miss the convenience, the access to information, the ability to stay in touch with people around the world? Kevin smiled, the first genuine smile he had shown since the interview began. I thought I would, he admitted. But what I discovered is that most of what I thought was essential was actually just behavioral conditioning. I don't miss the constant interruptions, the information overload, the anxiety of always being reachable. I don't miss measuring my worth by metrics created by algorithms designed to manipulate my behavior. He grew more serious. What I do miss is the person I was before I became dependent on systems I had created to exploit psychological vulnerabilities. The person who could think deeply, feel content without constant stimulation, and form relationships based on genuine compatibility rather than algorithmic matching. That's when Kevin did something unprecedented for a tech executive, appearing on national television. He reached into his pocket and pulled out what appeared to be the remnants of a smartphone, broken into pieces, clearly deliberately destroyed. This was my last phone, he said, holding up the fragments. I destroyed it 3 years ago as a symbolic rejection of the surveillance capitalism I had helped create. The audience gasped, unable to comprehend someone voluntarily destroying what most people considered an essential tool. I want everyone watching to understand something that I learned too late, Kevin said. addressing the camera directly. The devices in your pockets, the platforms you use to stay connected, the algorithms that determine what content you see, they're not neutral tools. They're behavioral modification systems designed to capture and monetize your attention, regardless of the impact on your mental health, your relationships, or your ability to think independently. He held up the broken phone fragments. Every notification is an interruption designed to break your concentration. Every recommendation is a manipulation designed to keep you engaged with content that serves commercial interests rather than your personal growth. Every metric, likes, shares, comments, is a variable reward system designed to create behavioral dependencies. Shares, comments, is a variable reward system designed to create behavioral dependencies. Oprah was openly crying now, understanding that she was witnessing something profound, a confession from someone who had helped create the digital systems that billions of people used daily, and who had discovered that those systems were fundamentally harmful to human well-being. "Kevin," she said, "what would you want people to understand about their relationship with technology?" Kevin looked directly at the camera, speaking to millions of viewers who were likely watching on devices powered by the very algorithms he had created. "I would want them to understand that they have more agency than they realize," he said. "The sense that you can't put your phone down, that you need to check social media constantly, that you're missing out if you're not continuously connected. Those feelings aren't personal weaknesses. They're the intended results of systems designed to create behavioral dependencies." His voice grew stronger, more urgent. "But you can reclaim your attention, your mental clarity, your ability to think deeply and feel content without constant digital stimulation. You can choose analog alternatives to digital solutions. You can create phone-free zones and times. You can rediscover the profound satisfaction that comes from sustained concentration, genuine solitude, and relationships that aren't mediated by algorithms." He paused, his voice taking on the authority of someone who had seen both sides of the digital divide. "The technology I created promised to connect you with the world, but it actually disconnects you from yourself. Real connection with other people, with nature, with your own thoughts and feelings, requires the kind of sustained attention that digital systems are designed to fragment and monetize. With your own thoughts and feelings, requires the kind of sustained attention that digital systems are designed to fragment and monetize." As the show concluded, Dr. Kevin Park stood and embraced Oprah with the presence of someone who had rediscovered what it meant to be fully human in an increasingly artificial world. The man who had spent years creating digital systems to capture human attention had learned that the most valuable human capacity was the ability to direct that attention intentionally, to choose what deserved focus and what deserved to be ignored. In the months that followed, Kevin's interview sparked conversations about digital wellness, algorithmic manipulation, and the psychological costs of constant connectivity. Some viewers began experimenting with digital detoxes, creating phone-free spaces in their homes, and rediscovering analog alternatives to digital solutions. Some viewers began experimenting with digital detoxes, creating phone-free spaces in their homes, and rediscovering analog alternatives to digital solutions. Kevin continued living his analog life in Montana, occasionally writing essays about the intersection of technology and human well-being, but mostly focusing on the simple, sustaining activities that had helped him rediscover what it meant to be human in an age of artificial intelligence. The interview became a touchstone for people questioning their relationship with technology, for parents concerned about their children's digital habits, and for anyone who had ever wondered whether constant connectivity was enhancing or diminishing their quality of life. Dr. Kevin Park learned that the most profound rebellion in the digital age was not creating more sophisticated technology, but choosing when not to use it. His greatest innovation turned out to be not an algorithm, but a way of living that prioritized human agency over digital dependency, sustained attention over constant distraction, and genuine connection over artificial engagement. The AI programmer's rebellion was ultimately a rebellion against his own creation, a choice to be human in a world increasingly designed to make humans behave like predictable machines. And in that rebellion, he found something that no algorithm could provide: peace, presence, and the profound satisfaction that comes from living according to human values rather than digital metrics. And in that rebellion, he found something that no algorithm could provide: peace, presence, and the profound satisfaction that comes from living according to human values rather than digital metrics.